welcome back, guys, to another episode of Wrestling with Memories. I am your host, Wax the Brain Hussein, joined by Fash the $1 Million Fan. Fash, how are you doing?
I am good though. It's still warm in Glasgow, and you might see I've got various mosquito bites or midges. You might want to Google this for people outside of Scotland. But I've been out watering the garden and stuff, Wax, but I just keep getting bitten by different insects. So it's great, but I'm looking a bit as if I've been through some nails, and that might link to what our topic is today.
I wonder what you're referring to, Fash. It is actually the legendary character, maybe not long-lived.
The infamous.
Infamous, that's the correct word, of Nailz. I will talk a lot about Nailz and the Big Boss Man over this period and their feud. Just a reminder to everybody, we're just off the back of WrestleMania 8, and we've talked a lot about, everything that happened out with this feud, and we talked a little bit about the Big Boss Man before this, but not really had a chance to dig into detail about him, and that's what we're going to do today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this show, the best part of it is when we look at the memorable storylines, which were really bad or really good, and things that people still Google and talk about, even though they were really short feuds or characters that came and went, but they carry some intrigue, and that's why one of the big storylines post WrestleMania was this feud between Nailz and the Big Boss Man. Why I love it is just the premise, and then the storyline was a little bit different for the times, and then it's got lots of absurd stuff going on.
Just to fill the audience in. To fill the audience in, I want to say that this is Fash's highlight of 1992, I think.
I don't think it's my highlight of 92, but
Fash is a big fan of the Nailz character.
I would say I am more intrigued by what could have been similar to the Papa Shango absurdity that we covered last week, Wax. I think this storyline is something that I really remember being intrigued by, but there's lots of nonsense here. And of course we know, and we'll talk about this in future episodes, that Nailz isn't long for WWE or WWF as it was then, because he's more famous for backstage antics and his role in the steroids trial. A show that you keep talking about that you're going to do as a special down the line, but we'll cover all that in the future. But right now we're just going to cover up to the announcement of somebody coming, all the way to, we'll talk about his big angle and then who he's facing at SummerSlam. But yeah, today is the focus of Nailz and the Big Boss Man. And Wax, we're talking about post WrestleMania, but the first time we actually hear of a new character coming is on the March 14th edition of Superstars. So this was a bit weird because it was before WrestleMania. The Big Boss Man is in that 8-man tag that we've covered in the archives, but there's this vignette in a prison from a distance, and we hear some man's voice saying, Boss Man, he's basically done his time and he's going to be out very soon, and he's going to come looking for the Big Boss Man.
Yep. So very quickly, we know it's some sort of ex-convict or convict, and he's after the Big Boss Man, revenge for putting him in behind bars. And at this point, Big Boss Man, mid-carder, he's been feuding with the Mountie, but quite a recognizable character of the early 90s, wouldn't you say, Fash?
Yeah, he definitely was. I mean, he came in as a heel, which I find interesting, and I've got a theory if this was in the Attitude Era of this feud, but he came in as a big heel, was kind of pushed really strongly at the beginning, and he's had that big feud, if you remember, with Hulk Hogan in 88, 89. And then after that, he turns face in 1990 and became a big kind of baby face. As you see, he was always the kind of mid-carder, upper mid-carder, challenged for championships, never really won any. But he had that famous gimmick that we loved in the 80s and 90s of something, which was a kind of, job, but, characters that could sell lots of merchandise and kids could copy. And the Big Boss Man was certainly one of the most memorable ones. Ray Traylor, a legendary character, and played lots of gimmicks, but his most famous one was certainly this one, the Big Boss Man. But as you were saying there, he was feuding with the Mountie, but we've discussed this in our archives, Wax, where he was feuding with IRS, and that feud went absolutely nowhere. So he's kind of floundering here. A nothing match at WrestleMania, and now finally there's going to be the spotlight on him again.
Yeah, and I find it really interesting that you put so much effort and time into building up an angle for a mid-carder like this, because really you could think you don't really need to spend too much time worrying about these guys in that place, and just have maybe an actual wrestling angle rather than having some fresh new character come in and focus on the Big Boss Man. And that's what they really did here. They spent a lot of time and effort. in pushing this angle, and a lot of build up. We wouldn't get the payoff for several months down the line until beyond.
Yeah,
But talk to a little bit about Nailz and his history. It's not one that I'm familiar with.
I'm not. I mean, I've not seen a lot of him pre WWF, but post his run, I have seen some things on YouTube. So he was um, known as Kevin Kelly in the wrestling circles. He most famous in the AWA. He was there, I think, as Mr. Magnificent. At one point, he was managed by Sherry, and then Medusa. But before the AWA ended, he left there, and in that guys, he looks very different. So I'm sure you've seen pictures of maybe clips of him, but he's got the long blonde hair and he's playing this kind of more bodybuilder type character, which is so different from the Nailz character. But I guess he was a tag team champion there from memory, but not somebody who was mainstream, as in, Kevin Kelly's signing with the WWF. I don't even think there's much stuff there in dirt sheets. He worked various dark matches and eventually got signed to play this character. And yeah, they've changed his look completely. Obviously, we won't see him yet because it is lots of voiceovers. But yeah, he was somebody who had been around the circuit and now had hit the big time. And with a character, as you say, where there was a lot of thought behind it, and this is why I find it intriguing. There's a story and a structure here, and quite a big way to debut someone, as we'll discuss.
Yep. So as you mentioned, we've got lots of little promos which are based on the outside of a prison, and we've got here this very raspy voice, very serious, very intense in the background. But we don't, as you say, we don't get to see Nailz in any of these promos. And it's not until an episode of Superstars where it's Big Boss Man up against some jobber, and it's quite interesting. He wins the match, but they make it quite clear he's like looking around throughout the match at the audience just to see if anybody's popping up. Just he's being extra careful. He's very nervous based on all the threats that he's had, and then suddenly through the audience we see this orange jumpsuit coming at us, and it's Nailz.
Yeah, and I'm just going to rewind it a little bit, Wax, because I'm just, he did the voiceovers, as I say, but the week before, Bossman actually beat another jobber who was Glenn Ruth. Now, do you know who Glenn Ruth was?
No.
Did you recognize him?
I don't even think I watched the match, Fash, to be fair.
Okay, so it's the week before, anyway. He beats a jobber called Glenn Ruth. Glenn Ruth is actually Headbanger Thrasher. So go back and watch this, right? At the end of that match, actually, we get a voiceover on the Tannoy system where, the convict is saying that he's coming very soon. And then next week, when he beats another jobber, and Bossman kind of viciously beats this jobber and, slaps him across the face a few times after beating him. Not a very babyface thing to do. As you say, we suddenly see the crowd reacting, and this big guy in an orange jumpsuit so he came straight out of prison, jumps over the barricade, and then we witness, I think for the time, the most vicious beatdown angle they ever did up to this point. I mean, this is pretty brutal for the time. And even when you watch it now, obviously we know it's kayfabe, but, I would encourage everyone to go and watch this because this is probably the highest point that this Nailz character is going to hit.
Yeah.
It's really brutal, isn't it, in terms of how they showed it and how Vince McMahon and Mr. Perfect sold it.
Yeah, absolutely. He comes down the ring to the ring and he grabs Big Boss Man's nightstick without him seeing, and then just launches into a vicious attack. And just it's quite good that what you just said there. The only other one that I can remember having such an impact on me was obviously maybe Randy Savage and Jake Roberts the year before we talked about. Yeah. But that wasn't really a beatdown, it was more about the snake and the bite. But this one was like just proper vicious. He was getting in his blows. And Big Boss Man's not a small man, but Nailz is absolutely huge. In all respects, he just looks like an absolute animal and a beast. And just this whole serious intensity that he had throughout. And just
he looked like a psycho. He looked like a psycho.
He looked like a psycho. And he made you believe that he was really actually out here for revenge.
Well, that's the thing, because it didn't feel like a wrestling angle, right? This was like, I mean, we talk about the cartoonish side of things, but we keep identifying these storylines that are a bit darker. And yeah, he came just like a guy would be beating up somebody. It wasn't wrestling holds and things. And, it's really brutal in terms of, I see he takes his nightstick. And then there's this shot that Mr. Perfect keeps talking about as well. You hear it, and they've got this really big, loud bang, which is like a shot to the boss man's legs, which you can really hear the echo of, which was done really well. But then he handcuffs him behind his back. And, there's some vicious slaps in there as well, Wax.
He starts choking him with the nightstick.
Yeah.
And it's very sickening, some of the stuff that's happening there.
It's stiff, isn't it, in terms of how he does it? And I think the way the boss man sold it was brilliant as well. I think we've got to give him props because he looks like he's getting absolutely destroyed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Nailz then makes his exit through the crowd, and obviously,
which is great. Again, if just to stop you there in the exit, we talked about, you know, Scott Hall
Yeah.
coming through the crowd and stuff. This was great. Again, this guy didn't come out, you know, to music or from the back. And this is little things that people forget that have happened in the past before. But yeah, coming through the crowd made it seem real. Leaving through the crowd made it seem real as well. And then, as I say, the way Vince McMahon, Mr. Perfect sold it was incredible. It just felt like somebody from the streets had came in
Yeah.
and just dished out a vicious beatdown.
Yeah, that leads to the dreaded stretcher job from the big boss man, and you know, he's out of action then for several weeks, I think, after this. And it's only next week, the following week, where Mean Gene does one of his update segments, where we finally actually hear or get the name revealed, which is actually Nailz. It's the first time that they've come out with that.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's never really announced himself. And we get a promo with Nailz holding the nightstick and just, you know, threatening and just reveling in the joy of that beatdown.
And he's psychotic again. As you see, up to this point, they were referring to him as the convict. And I've got a feeling as if that was the name they were initially going with. But then, no, here, as you say, they announce him as Nailz. And they say that, you know, he's called that because that's what the other inmates called him in prison. But just talk, you know, you talked about his voice wax, and something to note here is, yeah, they had digitally enhanced this, which we at the time didn't know. We just thought this guy had a really scary voice. But it's that kind of really deep boss man, that kind of thing going on where he's like, you know, talking in this way, and it makes him more psychotic, which once again, if you think about it, was a great masterstroke by Vince McMahon. Have you actually heard this guy talk in his actual voice?
No, I've not. It's
Well-
funny you mention it because
Well-
I don't think I want to, because it'll just ruin the whole.
Yeah, well, go on
Right.
YouTube and you'll find later on when he's doing independent stuff and you hear him speak in his normal voice, and you'll probably see why Vince and Co made that decision. It does take a little bit of the psychoticness away when you hear him speak in his real voice.
Who's the boss now? Boss man.
He carries the belt, and I want it. There's not too many things in life I want, but I want that stinking belt.
Yeah, I mean, over the course of these couple of weeks, you know, they started to reveal some pictures of the big boss man, and, you know, some of the injuries that he suffered. And some of the pictures are, if they were real, obviously they're not, but they just look horrific. You know, he's got black and blue eyes.
Yeah.
He's swollen up. He's got plasters all over his face. It's just, it's terrifically well done. You know, this whole part up to now.
And really, once again, I see the realism behind it. The black and blue bruising, the look. I think it was in the magazines as well at the time. And they're really saying this guy's broke, the big boss man. So once again, back when Nailz was coming out, it was similar to that kind of, we talked about the kind of silence that Papa Shango was coming out to, similar with Nailz.
Yep.
As well, because people are like scared of this character, because up to this point he's been presented in such a bad way. But as you know, Bruce Pritchard would say, the bell has to ring as well. And you know, these matches he's having against jobbers are absolutely awful. It's a lot of just kicking, choking, and slapping. What did you think of these jobber matches? Did Nailz leave any sort of impression on you?
Well, I think the only thing I would say is that the jobbers were so small, it made him look an absolute beast.
Yeah.
Like, he was annihilating them within a couple of minutes, you know, just choke holding them, and he was much bigger than any of the guys that we put in the ring with, and that just, I suppose, back then especially, it made him stand out. Like, this guy was, you know, on another level altogether. But you're right, his actual wrestling ability was zilch. You know, it was mostly charging around the ring, doing, as you say, choking people out and charging into them. That's pretty much
He
all
wasn't
he
going to
did.
get any 5 stars. I mean, part of me likes the fact if this was by design, because it's like he's like meant to be a guy who's in prison. Why would he suddenly be throwing drop kicks and wrestling moves? So part of me thought, okay, this is a bit realistic, but having seen stuff from years later as well, you have to continue to stick to that. So it tells me that, you know, the ability wasn't there as well. And in hindsight, if they would have got somebody who was a kind of high impact wrestler, you know, another big kind of beast type character that was really high impact, I think, you know, longevity wise, there's reasons why this character didn't continue for, as you say, backstage stuff, but maybe that would help because his matches were the pits, even against jobbers. And I can take the fact that there's some realism there in terms of the kind of choking and kicking and punching. But even if you saw him down the line, it feels like he didn't really want to use much wrestling ability. But throughout this, you know, there's a funny phone call, Wax, that I'd like to talk about. And it's an episode of Superstars where Mr. Perfect, the broadcast journalist that he is, tries to ring the big boss man to find out how he's doing.
Yeah, it's a moment of pure comedy, really, if you think about this this particular phone call, and this was very serious angle, and maybe somebody didn't smarten up the boss man in terms of how Mr. Perfect was going to play this. But Big Boss Man gets a telephone interview, and as while they're doing this, they're showing his beaten up face, black and blue. And Mr. Perfect, first question he asks is what it feels like to get such an embarrassing beating, and that just made me laugh out loud because Mr. Perfect playing his true heelish character, and here's this Big Boss Man who's getting zero sympathy at all from Mr. Perfect. But in essence, Boss Man says he will be back. And Mr. Perfect says, "Don't be stupid," because
I think he says, "If you come back, you're even stupider than I thought."
And he hanged up the phone on him.
And I thought that was so funny then,
Yeah.
and now because I watched it again today, and it's just hilarious that he puts the phone in. Mr. Man says, "How could you put the phone down on?" But it just made the Big Boss Man look like such an idiot.
Well, exactly, because it's very
Perfect
rare
is
that
great.
you get the heel, be getting one up in terms of brains on.
Mr.
on any of
Perfect
the
was just
big-
great. I mean, I'm looking forward to going to talk more about Kurt Hennig, but he was just excellent in this segment, as I say. And similar to him, talking about the legendary Bobby Heenan, there's episodes where he's on Wrestling Challenge and things where Nailz is beating up jobbers, and Heenan is as hilarious as ever, saying that, it was just a couple of parking tickets. And this guy was put in prison, and the Big Boss Man basically abused him. So it's just that hilarity that goes along with what's supposed to be a serious storyline. But as we say throughout this, there's conjectures the Big Boss Man going to come out. Nailz is beating up jobbers in the meantime, but then essentially on the 18th July, Superstars Wax, the Big Boss Man does return. And there's an interview segment with him and your favorite mean Woo Gene Okerlund.
Yep, it's the Boss Man finally back to quite a nice ovation from the crowds. They want to see their hero back. And I thought this was a really well delivered promo from the Big Boss Man, especially the crescendo at the end, where he was practically shouting into the camera. And I think there's a comment from Mr. Perfect as well when he came to the stage. How can he show his face to this crowd after being demolished by Nailz like that, which I thought was really funny. And then he goes, "He's not moving too fast, is he, Vince?" And Vince goes, "Yeah, it looks like he's lost a lot
Vince
of weight."
kept pushing the fact about the weight loss and how he looked like his injuries had made him trimmer. I couldn't really see the big difference in weight, though. I guess he's slightly trimmer in the weeks after this, but I think it was a bit of a stretch. But they were certainly playing.
Yeah. The Big Boss Man likes an open shirt, just like Fash does on a night out. The Boss Man says, he asked himself, was it worth it? Was, all this career worth it? Was it worth getting that big beating? And then he tells a story about how the 6-year-old, he was saying on his porch, and the 6-year-old randomly comes up to him and gives him a hug and asks him how he is. And Big Boss Man says, yes, it's definitely worth it. And he goes,
I'm here to tell you, I know what I have to do. Nailz, you beat me, but you didn't break me. Because you can't break the law. And I'm making a promise to that 6-year-old boy and every man, woman, and child that believe in law, order, and justice. I'm going to make a promise to you, wherever you might be, wherever you are. I'm coming after you, Nailz, and when I get you in that ring, I'm kicking your ass.
Yeah, and I mean, as I watched that again, I was thinking, how would Wax react if a kid came on his lawn and said, "Is he okay?" And I thought Wax's reaction would be totally different. He'd be like, "Get off my garden, get off the lawn." So that shows the difference between a hero like the Big Boss Man and you, the small Boss Man, in approach. And you, if Nailz would have given you that beating, I know you wouldn't be coming back.
Definitely not. I mean, why would you? And it's interesting also in all these matches that Nailz is having with the jobbers, he's using the nightstick at the end of the match to give them a proper beat down.
He seems to have a weird fascination with the nightstick.
He does. I don't really want to dig into that too much.
I don't want to go into that either, but just watch the promo.
They're certainly laying the foundation for the match to come later in the year, which we know is going to be a nightstick on a pole match.
Yep.
And so it's interesting that they've thought about it and they've implemented a really long-term storyline here between the two, and they've got their match already lined up.
Yeah, and I think, but it's a little bit odd here. So up to this point, I think everything was really great. But then, on the 1st August, Superstars, they announced that Nailz will take on Virgil at SummerSlam because Virgil's the Big Boss Man's friend and he's going to fight for his honor, which I thought was fine because, as you say, you want to build up. Our criticism of the way Papa Shango was handled was the fact that, he's straight away thrown at the top, then you can only come down. Here, there's that build up. But at the same time, I thought it was too quick for the Big Boss Man to come back because, by the 15th of August, Wax, Big Boss Man's going to return to in-ring action on Superstars, and he defeats Skinner. And to me, that was a bit weird because SummerSlam was still on the horizon in the UK. So the Boss Man's came back, but he's not going after Nailz really. So he's this lull period. He's not on that card. Whereas for me, what would have made sense was, he does a promo, I'm coming back, but you keep him off television until post SummerSlam. Because right now it's like, okay, you're back, your number one enemy's there, your friend's fighting for you, but why? So really, they should have played off the injury, and I think that's where they made a misstep in terms of storytelling with regards to this.
I would agree. It was only a couple of weeks away, actually, SummerSlam,
Yeah.
the point where he was having that match with Skinner. So there was no reason to bring him back that early, and especially if they're going to wait so long between SummerSlam and Survivor Series for a match. So certainly interesting. And interesting that it would be Virgil, of all people, to step in for the honor of Big Boss Man.
But Virgil's just a jobber to the stars. I mean, we were talking about, poor guy, SummerSlam 91, his biggest moment. By SummerSlam 1992, he is not at the top end anymore, unfortunately. And I think even as kids, we knew that Nailz was going to demolish him at SummerSlam. And we'll certainly talk about that in a future episode. I guess, as we wrap this up, Wax, one thing, there's a face-to-face as well that you can find on YouTube. I don't know if you've seen this, but I'd encourage everyone to find it, as always, of Primetime Wrestling it is. And it's the Boss Man on the line and Nailz on the line as well. And they're kind of having, and you've got Vince McMahon, Bobby Heenan, Mr. Perfect, etc. around. Remember the round table that they used to have? And I'd watch this because it's quite funny, because the Boss Man, as he's talking, watches his lines, and you see him visibly frustrated, and then they cover it up. But I think there's one point, because Nailz has got the digitized voice going on, and I think Boss Man speaks at the same time, so you realize it's digitized, his voice kind of gets modulated as well. So I'd check, find it. It's not the whole segment, but you'll find it online, which is something which is quite interesting from that time as well. And as they're talking, Bobby Heenan hits another funny. He basically asks the Big Boss Man a question, saying, "Is it true that your mother used to visit Nailz every Thursday?"
That's terrible from
to which Boss Man gives a very strong reaction. So post this show, everyone, please check that out as well. But this is a very interesting feud. I mean, at this point, it looks like, as you say, we're going to have this big collision between the two. It seems like Nailz is a pet project of Vince McMahon and the creative team, so it looks like there's going to be a bright future for him as a big nasty heel. And we spoke about in the last show that they're actually devoid of heels right now. So there's another one that they've kind of pushed to the top in a kind of prominent position. So at this point, you'd be quite interested to see what would happen.
So that's interesting, Fash. Let's play it out. We're not obviously going to be talking about the actual matches until much later, but let's imagine we don't know the result. But how would you have played out Nailz' career from here?
Well, how would I have played it out? So I would have had him beat the Big Boss Man. And I think it was really odd what happened at Survivor Series, because then they placed him in a feud with The Undertaker, but then there's the Ultimate Warrior, and we'll talk about all this stuff. But I think, if Nailz' problem was the in-ring ability, after a while, he got a bit better, but I would have positioned him as this big killer. He would destroys the Big Boss Man, which people are shocked by. Then I would have had him up against a feud with somebody like The Undertaker. I think WrestleMania 9, if other things had not happened, probably could have been Undertaker versus Nailz instead of the Giant Gonzalez. And maybe that was the plan, and we'll talk about all this, but obviously Nailz is going to fly off the handle. I certainly would have advised him not to do what he does with regards to Vince McMahon. But I think if you push it from here, it's probably, he goes through more jobbers. He has a match with the Big Boss Man, wins that, and then he is this kind of big bad that takes on an Undertaker or another, big hero character. And, we're jumping forward a little bit, but I'm sure people have seen the big face-off between him and The Undertaker. The reaction from the crowd is going to be later in the year, just before Nailz is going to leave. And Wax, I'd encourage you to go and watch it as well after the show if you haven't. But there was something there, even though the match was going to be the pits. And I think you can find some YouTube matches between the two on house shows that are obviously the pits. But the reaction of this character facing another one tells you there was money there. So I think that we're not going to see a long career here, but I would have had him beat the Big Boss Man at the first hurdle anyway, and then move on to something bigger.
Definitely, I agree with you, and something maybe we'll pick up later on.
There's lots to talk about. Like I say, there's so much to talk about here in terms of storylines and shifts and people coming and going. That there's plenty for us to discuss and lots to debate around.
So let's just chat quickly about what's coming up in our next couple of episodes. We're very much building up to SummerSlam. in the UK, the first pay-per-view event outside of the US. And, the changes that were going about and the build-up post-WrestleMania didn't really match the build-up coming into SummerSlam. We'll talk a little bit about why all that changed and who the big players were. And I really want to talk about that main event picture between Ultimate Warrior, Macho Man, and Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect. I thought that was really interesting. And we then really get to dig into Bret Hart, British Bulldog as well, and all the other angles that were going on at the same time.
So much going on. And obviously, you cut me off there, and the audience would have noticed that. And as I was in full flow there, Wax, that's one of the habits you have. And Wax also said that it's the first event outside the USA. He's a little bit wrong there because he's basically, indirectly dissed our Canadian friends. It's the first one, I guess, that we can see outside of the Americas, which is the big event, but certainly one that was huge for us.
Yeah.
And we're going to look forward, as you say, coming shows. Let's talk about some of those storylines that initially started and then seemed to drop, and then the big build up to the big event. And I'm keen to ask you if you can rekindle some of those memories when we were little kids. I have some distinct ones back when this event was kind of being hyped up and the excitement in the UK around this event taking place in Wembley Stadium. So I think there's lots to talk about in terms of characters, angles, storylines. Very interesting year, as we keep saying.
I'm certainly looking forward to it, but until then, he's Fash, I'm Wax, and this has been Wrestling with Memories.